Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm John Tucker.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
And Karen, let's begin with politics. President-elect Donald Trump has named his White House Chief of Staff. Let's get details this morning from Bloomberg's Doug Krisner.
Susie Wiles will be the first ever female White House Chief of Staff. She was one of the top architects of Trump's 2024 presidential campaign. Wiles was widely credited with bringing order and discipline to the chaotic world that Trump often cultivates. In a statement, Trump called her tough, smart, innovative, and universally admired and respected. Wiles is the daughter of famed NFL broadcaster Pat Summerall. She's been in politics since 1980, when she worked on Ronald Reagan's presidential campaign. In New York, I'm Doug Krisner, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Doug, thanks. So one of Trump's most highly anticipated cabinet picks will be Treasury Secretary. We get more with Bloomberg senior editor Bill Ferries.
There's a lot of names out there that'll be familiar to people. Scott Bessent of Key Square Capital Management. He has been a big advocate for Trump on the campaign trail, a big fundraiser, and a big critic of current Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. But there's also people like Jay Clayton, who was Trump's SEC chair. There's Tennessee Senator Bill Hagerty and former U.S. Trade Representative Bob Lighthizer. John Paulson is out there. So it's a huge number of names. I should also mention Cantor Fitzgerald's Howard Lutnick.
And Bloomberg senior editor Bill Ferries notes that Trump's first Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, was one of the few in his cabinet who served out the full term.
And Donald Trump says he has spoken with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky since the result, but not with Vladimir Putin. Speaking at a gathering in Sochi, the Russian president shared his hopes for working with the new U.S. administration.
I do not want to comment now on what was said consciously during the election campaign. I think it was said deliberately in the fight for votes. But it does not matter. What was said in the desire to restore relations with Russia to help end the Ukrainian crisis, in my opinion, seems to deserve at least attention. I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate him on his election as President of the United States of America.
Vladimir Putin speaking through an interpreter. On the campaign trail, Trump predicted he could end the Russia-Ukraine conflict the day after his election.
Well, John, Trump has received a phone call from current President Joe Biden. Biden spoke yesterday at the Rose Garden at the White House.
Yesterday, I spoke with President-elect Trump to congratulate him on his victory. And I assured him that I'd direct my entire administration to work with his team to ensure a peaceful and orderly transition.
President Biden also praised Vice President Kamala Harris, saying she showed great character and should be proud of her campaign.
And chalk up another battleground state win for Donald Trump. He has defeated Kamala Harris in Nevada, flipping a state that previously backed Democrats in 2016 and 2020. And that brings the electoral count to 295 for Trump and 226 for Harris.
And, John, control of the House is expected to be decided by races in the western U.S. Republicans hold 211 House seats to the Democrats' 199. Democrats hope to flip seats in races across California, Arizona, and possibly Oregon. But Republicans are showing leads in enough races to take a narrow majority. Back east in Pennsylvania, the GOP flipped two key races. Rob Bresnahan defeated incumbent Democrat Matt Cartwright 51% to 49% in District 8. And Democrat Susan Wild lost the 7th district to the GOP's Ryan McKenzie, 50.7% to 49.3%. And in the 10th district, Republican Scott Perry held on to defeat Democrat Janelle Stelson, 50% to 49%. Control of the House likely won't be called until next week.
And meanwhile, in New York, Karen, all House races, they have been called with a couple of districts flipping in Democrats' favor. Lauren Gillen defeated incumbent Republican Anthony D'Esposito in New York's 4th district, 50.9% to 49.1%. And Democrat Josh Riley secured victory in the state's 19th district, defeating Republican incumbent Mark Molinaro 50.5% to 49.5%.
Meanwhile, in the GOP-controlled Senate, John, Republicans widen their majority to 53 seats as former Bridgewater executive David McCormick defeated a longtime incumbent Democrat Bob Casey in Pennsylvania, 49 to 48.5%. Casey, who's held the seat since 2007, is Pennsylvania's longest-serving Democrat ever in the Senate. It was one of the most expensive Senate races this cycle.
And there's other election news, Karen. Levi's heir Daniel Lurie is set to become the mayor of San Francisco after spending more than $8 million of his own money to position himself as a political outsider who could best tackle the city's homelessness, drug, and crime problems. A winner hasn't been officially called, but incumbent London Breed did concede the election last night.
I called Daniel Lurie earlier today to congratulate him and made it very clear that my team and I stand ready to support him during his transition.
The preliminary results showed Lurie had won about 56% of the vote under the city's ranked choice voting system, compared with Breed's 44%. And a disclaimer, Michael Bloomberg, the founder and majority owner of Bloomberg LP, donated $1.45 million in support of Breed's re-election campaign.
Well, John, Federal Reserve Chair Jay Powell has made clear he's ready to defend the central bank from political pressure after the re-election of Donald Trump, following the Fed's unanimous decision to cut rates by a quarter point. Powell was repeatedly asked in his press conference about his position under the incoming administration.
Some of the president-elect's advisors have suggested that you should resign. If he asked you to leave, would you go?
No.
Can you follow up on, do you think that legally you're not required to leave?
No.
Do you believe the president has the power to fire or demote you, and has the Fed determined the legality of a president demoting at will any of the other governors with leadership positions?
Not permitted under the law.
Not what?
Not permitted under the law.
Now, Trump told Bloomberg in June that he might want more of a say in interest rates, though he added he'd let Powell serve out his current term, which ends in 2026.
And let's turn to the markets. The futures right now, they are mixed to little change following another record close on Wall Street. The S&P 500 gained 0.7%. The NASDAQ 100 climbed 1.5% at the close yesterday. Amanda Gotti, the chief investment officer of PNC, says the market rally is going to continue.
Typically, post-election results, we tend to get some nice tailwinds out of the market because there's just some certainty out of what happened with the election. But the reality is there isn't going to be that much that gets done over the next 6 weeks. It's just this idea that the Trump trade or the Trump bump is going to be very focused on the potential for cutting corporate tax rates, rolling back regulations, and so on and so forth. And so the market is just really excited, if not giddy, about that.
PNC Chief Investment Officer Amanda Gotti notes the S&P 500 finished with its 49th record this year.
Well, John, investors are not too impressed with China's latest attempt to support the economy there. Chinese stocks and the yuan declined after authorities announced a $1.4 trillion program to refinance local government debt. Beijing is rolling out more measures to support a slowing economy facing new risks from the re-election of Donald Trump. And it's time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Amy Morris. Amy, good morning.
Leaders of Israel and the Netherlands are condemning what they called anti-Semitic attacks on fans of soccer club Maccabi Tel Aviv before and after a Europa League soccer match. The violence erupted despite a ban on a pro-Palestinian demonstration near the soccer stadium. 5 people are hospitalized. More than 60 are detained. Details are not clear, but Israel ordered 2 planes be sent to the Dutch capital to bring those Israelis home. A rapidly growing brush fire in the L.A. area has burned out of control, destroying homes and triggering evacuations northwest of Malibu. Ventura County Sheriff Jim Fryhoff.
To date, we've evacuated over 400 homes, 250 residents choosing to stay and protect their homes, and there were 800 homes that no one was home, so assuming they had either left before we arrived, were at work, or otherwise out of town.
Hundreds of firefighters are battling the blaze. More than 14,000 evacuation orders are sent. The FBI says it's in touch with the Justice Department over racist text messages sent to Black Americans across the country. The texts, which were sent anonymously, addressed the recipients by name and told them they'd be selected for, quote, cotton picking. Some of the messages referenced President-elect Donald Trump. His spokespeople say they have nothing to do with that. A Detroit resident named Renee received one of the texts.
A plantation, to send us back to a plantation. It's uncalled for.
And now CBS News is reporting some of those texts were sent to a voicemail, identifying them as users of Text Now, a provider that allows users to create phone numbers for free. The service says it has shut down those accounts. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
Let's get the sports update. And for that, here is John Stasher. John, good morning.
All right, good morning, John. Wild Thursday night game to kick off Week 10. Bengals, Ravens, and AFC North battle in Baltimore that saw Cincinnati go up by 2 touchdowns. Baltimore rallied. Second half had a Lamar Jackson 84-yard TD pass and then a Joe Burrow 70-yarder to Jamar Chase. Those two hooked up with 38 seconds left. Cincy decided to go for a game-winning two-point conversion rather than the extra point in overtime. Incomplete pass. Baltimore won 35-34. Both the QBs threw 4 TD passes. 3 of Burrow's went to Chase, who had 264 yards in receptions. Jackson now 10-1 lifetime against Cincinnati. Next game up, Sunday morning, New York time, Giants and Carolina in Munich. Giants flew out yesterday, and before they did, Daniel Jones recalled his previous trip to Europe.
We're excited to go over there. I think, just the one experience I have to look back on is the London trip and just, how much energy and excitement there was in that stadium and the fans and how into it they are. That was a really, really cool experience.
Giants won that game 2 years ago with the Packers. That was part of a 6-1 start to that season. Since then, the Giants have 12 wins, 25 losses. At the Garden, very much an off night for Igor Shesterkin. Gave up 5 goals midway through the game, got pulled. Buffalo all over the Rangers 6-1. Islanders beat Ottawa 4-2. Devils beat Montreal 5-3. Bruins an overtime win over Calgary. Knicks tonight host Milwaukee. Nets are in Boston, and the 7-1 Warriors visit 9-0 Cleveland. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on SiriusXM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Hey, good morning. I'm John Tucker. Of course, the battle for control of the House still hasn't concluded, but a red sweep does look more and more likely after Donald Trump's election victory. And also, Trump picks his chief of staff. Well, let's get a roundup of the latest election-related stories this morning. Stephanie Baker, Bloomberg News senior writer, is joining us this morning. Always a pleasure, Stephanie. If there is a red sweep in the House, what kind of majority are we looking at right now? If it is a slim majority, does that actually narrow the scope of what can pass?
Really good question. It does look like of the remaining uncalled seats, the majority are leaning Republican. We'll see how that shakes out, that they could have at least a handful of seats for the Republicans, a slim majority, but enough to get their agenda passed. And let's face it, this is a huge sweep by the Republicans, control of the Senate, likely control of the House, and a Supreme Court where Donald Trump has chosen and picked several of the judges. So I think this is going to give Trump quite a wide mandate and quite sweeping powers to get his agenda across.
Just for the tally so far, the GOP holds a 211 to 199 edge in the House races. Those that have been called so far, 218 is the majority. There are a number of people, including Speaker Johnson, who says he's a free trade proponent. Back to the agenda. Is it really clear sailing for the Trump agenda if this pans out?
I think what Trump has said he wants to do is going to be harder to do in practice. He said he wants to deport 1 million immigrants on day one. I think that's going to be very hard just practically to carry out. He wants to impose sweeping tariffs. Now, under the Constitution, the Congress has the mandate to control tariffs, but there are also statutory regulations that give the president authority to do that under the International Economic Powers Act, which is the act that the Biden administration has used to roll out sanctions against Russia. Trump could use IEPA, this act, to roll out tariffs. Whether or not he will face face opposition from Republicans in Congress for his tariffs that in a way that would stop him from going ahead with this? I don't know. I think we're going to definitely see tariffs on some level. Whether or not they'll be as sweeping as Trump has talked about remains to be seen.
As chief of staff, is Susie Wiles a calming, reasonable voice in this administration?
It's a really interesting pick. She's the first woman to hold that position. She's been a very quiet figure. She's not on social media much. She's not a regular on Fox News. And she's not a Washington insider. So that could spell trouble for her going forward. But with Republicans likely in control of both houses of Congress, that might not matter as much as it would in the past. She has remained as Trump's campaign chairman throughout the campaign, which was not the case last time around, which shows that she does have staying power. And she was applauded for having brought order to the Trump campaign. She may not have been able to control Trump, the candidate, and his messaging, but she ran a very tight operation, and I think that's indicative of what she'll bring to the White House.
Way too short a visit. Stephanie Baker, Bloomberg News senior writer. Thank you very much. Karen.
Well, John, we now want to bring you our discussion with ARK Investment CEO Cathie Wood. She joined Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Business Week discussing what a second Trump term means for investors and how it could reshape the financial industry. They began with a question on the regulatory environment in the U.S. Let's listen in.
The regulations that have been creeping into the system, actually, they started to creep in. They've just flooded the system and really gummed it up. So the biggest regulatory issues have been around the SEC, especially when it comes to digital assets or crypto legislation, and the FTC as it relates to M&A activity. I think both there are going to be big changes there, and that is going to be the beginning, I think, of a lot of regulatory changes. In his first administration, President Trump basically said, for every regulation you want to introduce anyone in my administration, you must get rid of two. I think it's going to be maybe more dramatic than that this time around. And I also think having Elon Musk, who I think today announced that he'd like to name a new department, the Department of Government Efficiency, get that, D-O-G-E, Doge. I think he's going to come into the administration. I don't think he'll be a formal part of the administration. He'll be more in an oversight role, as I understand. Yeah.
Hey, Cathie, I want to jump in here because you mentioned a few things that I want to follow up on. One is Elon Musk. Have you talked to Elon since the election?
No, I have not talked to him since the election. I did see on X that he was part of the family as they were taking the picture around President Trump's acceptance speech. So, I know he's obviously had a tremendous impact on the election. I think he had X made a big difference, and his ideas around government efficiency, which will revolve importantly around technology. Artificial intelligence is doing wonders for the most bureaucratic organizations out there. We know from Palantir that it is having a tremendous impact on insurance companies, underwriting process timelines dropping from 2 weeks to 3 hours. And even in the military, Maven, Palantir's working on Maven with the DoD for targeting the enemy. They have shrunk that department. Don't need as many people. They've gone from 2,000 to 20 people. Right. Which it's pretty amazing what's going on, and I think we'll see a lot of attrition. Any employee leaving the government probably will not be replaced. Okay, I don't think he'll. I don't think he'll do $2 trillion in government spending savings in 1 year. That might be a 5 to 10 year. And I think between technology and attrition and lower regulations, maybe the abolition of certain departments, that they'll go a long way.
So you don't see him serving a formal role, but still overseeing some sort of Department of Government efficiency in an informal way? Help me understand what you see him doing, and whether or not that could be some sort of threat to, he's a very busy man.
He is the inventor of our age, and he comes into a problem, assesses it with first principles thinking, doesn't care how things have been done, and comes back with, ingenious solutions to big problems, whether it's autonomous mobility in the autonomous taxi space, or in the healthcare space, Neuralink. He's in the social network space, X, in AI, XAI, and a lot of people say, and SpaceX, of course, the entire exploration, going to Mars. I think a lot of people are can't believe he can do this. But again, he cuts to the quick, first principles thinking, and surrounds himself with brilliant people who really want to solve the hardest problems in the world. And that's part of the secret to his success. Very high standards, and people who want to be held accountable to very high standards and want to really transform the world.
Hey, we're going to get back to Elon and specifically Tesla in a few minutes, but I want to go back to something that you mentioned at the top of our interview, Kathy, and that's the idea of some of the regulatory challenges that you said have cropped up over the last couple of years and during the Biden administration, specifically with regard to the FTC and the SEC not being present in a second Trump administration. How do you think the Trump regime will approach financial regulation, given that he's vowed to replace SEC Chair Gary Gensler? What does that look like?
I think first, as it relates to crypto or digital asset regulation, they're going to replace Gary Gensler with someone who is much more open-minded, I would say, and will let the legislative process go to work. And, the SEC is supposed to regulate, enforce laws. They're not supposed to create laws by enforcement, which is what Gary Gensler was doing. So I think that's going to be important. I also think if you look at the public equity markets, I think the number of public companies out there right now has been cut in half in the last 15, 20 years. The regulatory nightmare of being a public company has kept leaders of companies basically saying, if I don't have to go public, I am not going public. And so I think we're going to see a lot more work in that regard to give, the average investor a shot at some of these moonshots. So I think that's going to become very important.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak, your morning podcast on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 92.9 in Boston, and nationwide on Sirius XM Channel 121.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, now with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto interfaces.
And don't forget to subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. It's the latest news whenever you want it, in 5 minutes or less. Search Bloomberg News Now on your favorite podcast platform to stay informed all day long. I'm Karen Moscow.
I'm John Tucker. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.